At my husband's funeral, while people were still carrying paper plates of ham sandwiches through the church basement, a lawyer I had never met touched my elbow and asked me why I had never claimed the $38 million sitting in my name. I remember looking down at his hand first. Not his face, his hand. Clean nails, wedding band, a small ink stain near his thumb. Then I looked at the folder tucked under his arm, cream-colored, expensive, with my husband's full legal name printed on the tab. "Mrs. Whitaker," he said quietly, "I'm sorry to approach you today, but this account has been inactive for years, and with your husband's passing, there are deadlines." I almost laughed because grief does strange things to the mind. I thought he had mistaken me for another widow. My husband, Daniel, had left behind a 12-year-old sedan, a mortgage with 21 years remaining, and a drawer full of hardware store receipts. We were not $38 million people. We were coupon people, repair-it-ourselves people, teachers' discount people. I told the lawyer that Daniel and I had never had that kind of money. He looked at me for a long moment, then glanced toward the corner of the room where Daniel's older brother, Richard, stood in a charcoal suit, speaking softly to two men from the bank. Then the lawyer lowered his voice and said, "That is exactly what concerns me. Good day, dear listeners. It's Nora again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video, and also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Nora Whitaker. I was 52 years old when this happened, a high school history teacher in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and for 26 years I believed I understood the shape of my own life. That is something I taught my students every semester. History is not only what happened, it is what people believed was happening while it happened. The difference between those two things can break a person open. My life with Daniel had been ordinary in the way I once loved. We lived in a white 2-story house on Ashbury Lane, with tired gutters, a maple tree in front, and a kitchen floor that creaked near the pantry. I taught juniors and seniors American history. Daniel worked in logistics for a regional grain company. He was quiet, careful, and kind in the small ways that matter when no one is watching. He scraped ice from my windshield before school. He wrote the grocery list in neat capital letters. He always put the coffee on before he showered. We did not have children. That was an old ache between us, one we had made peace with in private. I poured much of my maternal energy into my students, into grading essays at the kitchen table, into writing comments like, "Good evidence, but explain your reasoning," and "History is more than dates. Ask why." Daniel used to smile when I said that. "You teach like a detective," he told me once. "You never let anybody get away with a weak argument." I thought that was love, seeing someone clearly, being seen clearly in return. Daniel had died of a heart attack on a Wednesday morning in March. There was no warning, at least none I recognized at the time. He was 56, he had kissed my forehead at 6:20, told me we were out of orange juice, and by 8:05 I was standing in the emergency room while a doctor with tired eyes used the phrase, "We did everything we could." After that, time became a hallway with all the doors shut. The funeral was 4 days later. Richard arranged much of it. He had always been the capable one in Daniel's family, a senior vice president at Hawthorne Trust, the old private bank downtown where wealthy families kept their foundations, trusts, and secrets. Richard was polished in a way Daniel never was. He knew which tie belonged with which suit. He remembered judges' names, golf handicaps, and where people's children went to college. He had helped Daniel and me over the years with financial housekeeping, as he called it. Nothing dramatic, refinancing paperwork, insurance forms, the occasional tax document Daniel said Richard understood better than we did. I never liked depending on Richard, but Daniel trusted him. That became one of the hardest sentences of my life. Daniel trusted him. At the funeral, Richard stood beside me like a guardrail. He introduced people I could not place. He corrected the pastor gently when Daniel's college was misnamed. He made sure the coffee urn stayed full. He even put a hand on my shoulder when I trembled during the hymn. A person can be useful and dangerous at the same time. I did not know that yet. The first warning signs had come months before Daniel died, but I had filed them away under ordinary stress. Teachers know the danger of late recognition. A student misses one assignment, then two, then stops making eye contact, and by the time everyone realizes something is wrong, the problem has roots. Daniel had started taking phone calls in the garage. At first, I thought it was work. Logistics, shipping delays, fuel prices, a supplier in Davenport. But then I noticed he never spoke loudly enough for me to hear. He would step outside with his phone, the porch light falling over his shoulders, and come back smelling of cold air and worry. "Everything okay?" I asked one night. He put the phone face down on the counter. "Just Richard." That answer should have settled me. Instead, it did the opposite. Richard had begun appearing in our lives more often. He dropped by with envelopes for Daniel to sign. He invited us to dinner at restaurants where the waiter folded the napkin if you stood up. He made jokes about how teachers were the real heroes, but his eyes always moved past me when financial matters came up, as if I were furniture with a pension. Once, in November, I came home early from a parent-teacher conference because the flu had emptied half my classes. Richard's black Mercedes was in our driveway. I found him and Daniel in the dining room, with papers spread across the table. When I walked in, Daniel gathered the papers too quickly. Richard smiled without surprise. "Nora, we were just going over some estate cleanup for your peace of mind." "My peace of mind usually gets a chair at the table," I said. Daniel looked embarrassed. Richard chuckled. "Of course," he said. "It's mostly boilerplate. Daniel worries too much." But that night, when I asked Daniel what he had signed, he rubbed his forehead and said, "Nothing final. Richard's just helping organize things." "Organize what?" "Our affairs." I remember that phrase because it sounded borrowed. Daniel would have said bills, papers, the mess in the drawer, not affairs. Around Christmas, I noticed a locked file box in the basement. It was grey metal, tucked behind old paint cans beneath the stairs. We had never owned a locked file box. When I asked Daniel about it, he said it belonged to Richard and he had forgotten to return it. "Why is Richard storing bank papers in our basement?" Daniel was replacing a light bulb over the washer. He did not look at me. "Because his office is being renovated." It was a bad lie, not a cruel lie, not yet, but bad. As a teacher, I paid attention to hesitation. Students could memorize dates and still reveal uncertainty in the pause before an answer. Daniel had begun pausing before ordinary things. Then came the bank envelope. It arrived in January, thick and formal, addressed to Daniel Whitaker and Nora Whitaker jointly. The return address was Hawthorne Trust Private Client Services. I picked it up from the mailbox after school, my fingers stiff from cold, and set it on the kitchen table with the grocery flyers. By the time I came back from changing clothes, it was gone. Daniel was at the sink rinsing a coffee mug. "Did you see an envelope from Hawthorne?" He turned off the water too slowly. Richard took it by mistake. It was meant for him. It had our names on it. He dried the mug, though it was already dry. Clerical error. I stood there with my teacher bag still over my shoulder, papers inside waiting to be graded, and something in me made a small note in red ink. Clerical errors do not make people afraid. 2 weeks later, Daniel asked me whether I still had my birth certificate and our marriage license. For what? Richard says we should keep copies with the estate file. I got them from the hall closet. Daniel photocopied them at work. He gave the originals back. I never saw the copies. The last conversation we had about Richard happened 3 nights before Daniel died. I found Daniel sitting alone in the dark living room, only the television glow on his face. He was holding an old photograph of his mother, Evelyn, standing in front of a farmhouse I did not recognize. Evelyn had died before I met Daniel. Daniel rarely spoke of her, except to say she was tougher than both her sons put together. "What's that?" I asked. He slipped the photograph into a book. "Just found it in the attic." "Daniel." He closed his eyes. "I need to tell you something," he said. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen, and whatever he had been about to say disappeared. The caller ID said Richard. Daniel did not answer, but he also did not tell me. At the funeral luncheon, after the lawyer asked about the money, I followed him into a small classroom off the church basement. There were construction paper crosses taped to the wall, and a low shelf of crayons beneath the whiteboard. It smelled faintly of glue and lemon cleaner. My husband was being mourned 30 feet away, and I was standing under a poster that said "Be kind," while a stranger explained that I might be wealthy. His name was Thomas Vale. He was a probate attorney from Des Moines. I later learned he had been retained by a man named Samuel Orton, a private investigator who had died the previous year. At that moment, all I saw was a man with tired eyes and careful manners. He opened the folder. "I'm going to ask you something directly," he said. "Did your husband ever tell you about the Whitaker Orton account?" "No." "Did he tell you about the Ashbury Lane Trust?" "No." "Did he tell you he won a state lottery prize 22 years ago under a legal entity created before your marriage?" I sat down in a child-sized chair because my knees had become unreliable. "No," I said again, but this time the word barely came out. Mr. Vale slid a document toward me. It was a photocopy of an account statement from Hawthorne Trust, dated 7 years earlier. Daniel's name appeared as trustee. My name appeared as successor beneficiary. The amount near the bottom was $38,214,903.17. Numbers have their own language. I had taught students to read census tables, casualty lists, tax records, migration charts. Numbers tell stories people try to hide. That number did not look like wealth to me. It looked like a locked door. "This can't be real," I said. "I believe it is. My husband made $68,000 a year. Publicly, yes." I stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. "Where did it come from?" "That is one of the questions." "One of them." He removed another page. "There are irregularities, changes to beneficiary forms, transfers to entities connected to Richard Whitaker, signatures that may not be authentic. A trust amendment filed 18 months ago that removed your access entirely." I looked up. "Removed my access from money I never knew existed?" Mr. Vale nodded. "Exactly." Outside the room, someone laughed too loudly at a memory of Daniel. It cut through the door like a knife. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because after Daniel's death, Richard's office filed preliminary notice to take control of the trust as administrative successor. My firm received an automatic alert tied to an old investigation. Mrs. Whitaker, I believe your husband may have tried to stop something before he died." I thought of Daniel in the dark living room. "I need to tell you something. There are moments when the past rearranges itself. Not loudly, quietly, like a classroom after the students leave, chairs crooked, papers left behind, clues everywhere." Before I could ask another question, the classroom door opened. Richard stood there. He did not look startled. That was what frightened me later. Not his presence, but his lack of surprise. "Nora," he said softly, "people are asking for you." Mr. Vale closed the folder. Richard's eyes moved to it, only for a second. "Thomas, I didn't realize you knew the family." "We're becoming acquainted," Mr. Vale said. The room became so still I could hear the church refrigerator humming through the wall. Richard smiled at me then, a careful, sympathetic smile. "You've had a terrible shock today. This is not the time for paperwork." No one had told him what we were discussing, but somehow, he knew. That night, I drove home alone because I could not bear to sit beside Richard in the limousine he had arranged. The March sky was the color of wet slate. My black dress scratched at my neck. On the passenger seat beside me was a copy of the statement Mr. Vale had given me, folded once inside a church bulletin with Daniel's picture on the front. I parked in my driveway and did not go inside. The porch light was on, as Daniel had left it every evening for 26 years. The maple tree branches moved gently in the wind. Our house looked exactly the same, which felt almost insulting. I wanted it to show some sign that the foundation had cracked. I sat there for a long time. Fear is strange. It does not always make you small. Sometimes it makes you very still. I thought about my students, and the way they wanted history to be simple. Villains with black hats, heroes with clean hands, a date on the board, a cause, an effect, a test question. But real history was made of private decisions, unsigned letters, missing records, people protecting reputations until the truth became expensive. And what had Daniel hidden from me? What had Richard stolen? And why had Daniel, who shared grocery lists and weather warnings and the smallest school gossip with me, kept $38 million buried under our marriage, like a body under floorboards? Inside, the house smelled like the lilies people had sent after Daniel died. Too sweet, already turning brown at the edges. I took them from the counter and put them in the garage. Then I made coffee, though it was nearly midnight. I placed a yellow legal pad on the kitchen table. Teachers love legal pads because they make chaos look like it can be organized. I wrote 3 columns: what I know, what I suspect, what I need to prove. Under the first column, I wrote, Daniel dead, Richard involved, Hawthorne account, $38 million. My name on documents. Husband lied. That last one made my hand stop. I crossed it out. Then I wrote, husband withheld information. It was more precise. Precision mattered. Grief wanted to make accusations. Evidence required patience. Under what I suspect, I wrote, Richard manipulating Daniel. Fraud. Forged signature. Hidden lottery. Trust. Mother's house. Then I opened the junk drawer and found the small key Daniel used for the basement file cabinet. I went downstairs with my coffee in one hand and my phone flashlight in the other. The basement was cold. It smelled of dust, laundry soap, and old wood. The grey metal lockbox was still beneath the stairs behind the paint cans. The key did not fit. I almost laughed again. Of course it did not. Nothing was going to be that easy. But as I knelt there, my phone light swept across the underside of the stairs and caught something I had never noticed. One panel of wood near the back was newer than the others, not by much. Same stain, same dust, but the screws were different. Daniel was handy, but he was not neat with screws. These were perfectly aligned. I touched the panel. It shifted. Behind it was a narrow space, no bigger than a shoebox. Inside was an old manila envelope wrapped in a dish towel. My name was written across the front in Daniel's handwriting. Nora, if I don't explain in time. I sat back on the basement floor and covered my mouth. For a moment, I was angry at him for being dead, angry in a way that felt shameful and human. He had left me a sentence instead of an answer. Inside the envelope were 3 things: a flash drive, a small brass key, and a note. Nora, I was trying to fix what I let Richard do. I thought I could protect you by keeping you out of it. I was wrong. Trust no one at Hawthorne except records. Call a lawyer who does not know Richard. The account was never supposed to be mine alone. Mum's truth is in the house on County Road 9. I'm sorry. D. I read it 5 times. Mum's truth is in the house on County Road 9. Daniel had never told me his mother had owned a house on County Road 9. The next morning, I called in sick for the first time in 9 years, for a reason that was not fever, snow, or surgery. Then I called Thomas Vale. He answered on the 2nd ring. I found something, I said. He did not ask me to describe it over the phone. That was the first thing that made me trust him. Put it in a clean envelope, he said. Do not plug in the drive. Do not tell Richard. Do not call Hawthorne. I can be in Cedar Rapids by noon. I looked across the kitchen at Daniel's empty chair. I need to know if my husband was part of this. There was a pause. We'll follow the documents, Mr. Vale said, wherever they lead. That became our rule. Follow the documents. Not feelings, not family stories, not Richard's confident voice. Documents. By noon, Mr. Vale was sitting at my kitchen table in a brown overcoat with a forensic accountant named Elaine Porter, a woman in her 60s with silver hair, square glasses, and the calm expression of someone who had seen rich men lie badly for 30 years. Elaine wore no jewelry except a watch. She placed a scanner on my table and photographed every page before touching it. Chain of custody, she said. It sounded like a phrase from television, but she made it ordinary, like taking attendance. Mr. Vale asked me to tell the story from the beginning without guessing. I did. Every call, every envelope, every strange hesitation, the file box, the photocopied marriage license, the conversation Daniel never finished. He took notes without interrupting. When I was done, Elaine said, "You observe like a teacher. I am one." "That will help." She said it so plainly I almost cried. We opened the lockbox with the brass key Daniel had hidden. Inside were decades of records, bound with rubber bands that had gone brittle, bank statements, trust documents, copies of lottery commission forms, property deeds, a sealed envelope from Evelyn Whitaker to Daniel, and a birth certificate that made Elaine stop moving. "What is it?" I asked. She angled it toward Mr. Vale. The name on the certificate was Daniel James Orton Whitaker. Father, unknown. Mother, Evelyn May Orton. I had never seen Orton in Daniel's name before. Mr. Vale looked at me. The investigator who retained me was Samuel Orton. I felt the room tilt slightly. Was he related to Daniel? That, Mr. Vale said, is now another question. The flash drive contained scanned documents, audio recordings, and photographs of papers that appeared to have been taken quickly, maybe with Daniel's phone. Elaine made a forensic copy before reviewing it. She explained each step, not because I understood all of it, but because she believed I deserved to. That mattered. The first recording was Daniel's voice and Richard's. I sat at the table with my hands folded, while my dead husband spoke from Elaine's laptop. I want Nora told, Daniel said. Richard sighed. You're emotional. I'm done signing things I don't understand. You understood enough when you wanted protection from taxes. You understood enough when you didn't want your wife dragged into mother's mess. She has a right to know. She has a right to peace, Richard said. His voice was smooth, almost tender. And you have a right not to destroy her life with a story she can't process. Daniel said something too quiet to hear. Then Richard's voice sharpened by only a degree. If Nora starts digging, she will lose the house. She will lose the pension rollover. She will spend years in court. And by the end, she will learn that you lied to her for half your marriage. Is that what you want your legacy to be? There was a long silence. Then Daniel whispered, You stole from her too. Richard said, Be careful. Not loud, not angry. Careful. I understood then why Daniel had been afraid. Over the next month, my life became a lesson plan no sane teacher would assign. Objective: determine whether your marriage was built on fraud. Materials: bank records, probate filings, forged signatures, one dead husband's apology. Assessment: survival. I returned to school because I needed routine. During the day, I taught Reconstruction, the New Deal, the Cold War. I told students to cite their sources. I reminded them that power protects itself. I wrote hall passes and graded essays, and answered questions about extra credit. In the evenings, I sat with Mr. Vale and Elaine, building a timeline across my dining room wall with painter's tape. Dates became anchors. 22 years earlier, Evelyn Whitaker had apparently won a lottery jackpot through a family pool of tickets, then used a private trust to claim it anonymously. The trust was created at Hawthorne, where Richard, then a rising associate, handled the paperwork. Daniel was named trustee because Evelyn did not trust Richard with money. That sentence appeared in one of her letters, written in blue ink with a shaking hand. Richard is clever, Daniel is kind. Clever men convince themselves kindness is weakness. The trust was supposed to benefit Daniel during his life, then me if Daniel died, and eventually a scholarship foundation Evelyn wanted established for students from rural counties. That last part made me sit back in my chair. A scholarship foundation. Evelyn had hidden wealth not to live like royalty, but to send farm kids to college. I thought of my students, their tired faces in first period, the ones who worked evening shifts and still finished essays at midnight. Why didn't Daniel tell me? I asked. Mr. Vale did not soften the answer. Shame, pressure, maybe fear. Maybe he believed secrecy was temporary, until it became permanent. That was when I understood one of the cruelest things about secrets. They do not stay the same size. They grow inside the silence people build around them. The first concrete proof came from a notary log. A trust amendment dated 18 months earlier had removed me as beneficiary and appointed Richard as administrative successor. The signature on the amendment was supposedly mine. I had been at a school board curriculum meeting that evening, speaking against cutting social studies electives. There were minutes, video, and 37 witnesses. The notary, a woman named Patrice Hale, worked at Hawthorne. Elaine found her log entry. It said I appeared in person at 4:15 p.m. with a driver's license. At 4:15 p.m., I had been on camera adjusting a projector in room 212 of the district office. The truth has a weight of its own. When Elaine placed those two records side by side, I felt it settle into the room. Mr. Vale filed a preservation demand with Hawthorne Trust. He requested account records, internal communications, signature cards, visitor logs, notary journals, security footage, and all documents relating to the Whitaker-Orton Trust. Within 48 hours, Richard called me. I was in my classroom after school, erasing the board. The room smelled of dry erase marker and teenage perfume. His name appeared on my phone. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered and put it on speaker, just as Mr. Vale had instructed. "Nora," Richard said warmly, "I've been worried about you. I'm managing. I heard you've hired counsel." "Yes." A soft sigh. "That's unfortunate." "Why?" "Because lawyers turn grief into invoices." I looked at the rows of empty desks. "Then I'll keep good records." Silence. He recovered quickly. "Daniel would hate this. He wanted you protected." "From what?" "Confusion. Predators. People who see a grieving widow and imagine opportunity." "Are you talking about Mr. Vale?" "I'm talking about anyone who fills your head with half-truths." I picked up a marker cap from the floor and set it on the tray. Small motions kept my hands steady. "Richard, did you file documents removing me from Daniel's trust?" Another silence, shorter this time. "You don't understand the structure." "Then explain it." "It's complicated. I teach the causes of the Civil War to 16-year-olds in 47 minutes, I said. "Try me." His laugh was polite and cold. "Nora, this attitude is not like you." That was the first open insult. Not loud, not crude, just the suggestion that calm questioning was a personality defect. He continued, "I'm asking as family. Pause this before you embarrass yourself. Send anything you want me to review to my lawyer. I can help you without court." "I'm sure you can." Then I hung up. I stood in the classroom for several minutes afterward. My hands were trembling, but not because I had lost control, because I had kept it. I was not brave, I was careful. Richard's pressure increased after that. A sympathy card arrived with no return address, containing a handwritten note. "Daniel made mistakes too. Don't let strangers profit from them." Then a parent requested a meeting with my principal, claiming I had become distracted and unstable in class. The parent turned out to be married to a Hawthorne board member. My principal, Mr. Alvarez, called me in gently. I told him only that I was involved in a probate dispute and that a powerful person might attempt to damage my reputation. He leaned back and studied me. "Nora," he said, "I've watched you teach for 18 years. If someone says you're unstable, they'd better bring footnotes." I almost smiled. Then my mortgage servicer sent a notice claiming my automatic payments had failed. Elaine found that the payment account had been frozen temporarily due to a compliance review initiated through Hawthorne's private client division. The freeze was reversed after Mr. Vale sent a letter that included the phrase, "tortious interference." I learned many new terms that spring: constructive fraud, undue influence, fiduciary duty, spoliation, conversion, quiet title, words that sounded dry until they became weapons in defense of your own life. The larger mystery was Evelyn's house. County Road 9 was a narrow stretch of land outside Marion, lined with fields, old barns, and houses set back behind windbreaks. The deed records showed that Evelyn had owned a farmhouse there until her death, but the property had never been transferred through probate. Instead, it had been placed into a shell company called CR9 Holdings, managed by Richard. When Mr. Vale and I drove there one Saturday morning, the house looked abandoned but not forgotten. White siding, green shutters, a sagging porch, lilacs near the fence. The March wind moved through the dry grass with a sound like paper being shuffled. We had legal permission to enter through an emergency court order, because the property belonged to the disputed trust. Richard's attorney objected, but the judge allowed inspection after Elaine showed evidence that trust assets might be at risk. Inside, the farmhouse smelled of cedar, mice, and closed rooms. Sheets covered the furniture. Dust lay thick on the windowsills. In the kitchen, an old calendar still hung from 2003, the year Evelyn died. I walked through slowly, feeling like I had entered a chapter Daniel had torn from our marriage. In the back bedroom, behind a loose panel inside a closet, we found a metal cash box. Not money, papers. Evelyn had kept everything. There were letters from Samuel Orton, the investigator. There were DNA test results from 24 years earlier. There were photographs of Evelyn with a man who was not Daniel's legal father. There was a handwritten statement signed by Evelyn and witnessed by Samuel. Daniel and Richard were half-brothers. Richard's father had raised them both, but Daniel's biological father was a wealthy grain broker named Harold Voss, who had died without acknowledged children. Evelyn had received a confidential settlement from the Voss estate after DNA confirmed Daniel's parentage. That settlement, combined with the lottery winnings, had formed the original trust. Richard had known. Daniel had not, at least not until later. The betrayal was not only financial, it was historical. Richard had rewritten Daniel's identity, then monetized the confusion. Among the papers was a letter Evelyn had written to Daniel, but apparently never mailed. "Danny, if Richard tells you this money is dirty, he is lying. The only dirty thing is what people do to control it. I made choices I regret, but loving you was not one of them. Nora must be protected, because she will tell the truth even when it costs her." I cried then. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just tears falling onto my coat while I stood in a dead woman's bedroom reading the faith she had placed in me before we had ever met. The point of no return came 3 days later. Hawthorne produced partial records under court order. They did not produce everything. Institutions rarely hand over their own rope willingly, but what they produced included an internal email from Richard to Patrice Hale, the notary. Subject: Whitaker signatures. Message: use existing ID copy. Wife unavailable. Daniel authorized expediency. Date per instructions. That email was not a smoking gun. It was a lit match in a room full of gasoline. Elaine traced transfers from the trust into 3 entities: CR9 Holdings, Meridian Legacy Advisors, and a charitable foundation with a noble name and almost no charitable activity. All 3 were connected to Richard. Over 14 years, more than $9 million had moved through management fees, consulting arrangements, property transactions, and administrative reimbursements. Richard had not emptied the account all at once. He had harvested it. That made him more dangerous. A thief who steals slowly often believes patience makes him legitimate. Mr. Vale filed a civil complaint in probate court and a referral with federal authorities because trust assets had crossed state lines through investment vehicles. He also petitioned to freeze the account. Richard responded with elegance. His attorneys claimed Daniel had suffered anxiety and cognitive decline before death. They suggested I had manipulated Daniel during his final months. They submitted affidavits from 2 Hawthorne employees, describing me as financially unsophisticated and emotionally volatile. One affidavit claimed I had shouted in the bank lobby years earlier. I had never been inside Hawthorne's private client lobby in my life. When I read those documents, I felt heat rise in my face. Mr. Vale watched me carefully. "Do not answer emotionally." "I know. Answer with evidence." So I did what I had taught students to do for years. I annotated. Line by line, I marked every false claim, every unsupported assertion, every passive construction that hid an actor. I found my school calendar from the date of the alleged bank incident. I had been chaperoning a debate tournament in Ames. There were photos. Receipts. A bus roster. When we submitted our response, Mr. Vale included my timeline as an exhibit. He called it meticulous. I called it grading. The confrontation came on a Thursday evening in April. It was raining. I had just come home from school, tired enough to feel hollow, when I saw Richard's Mercedes parked at the curb. He was standing on my porch under the yellow light, holding an umbrella he had not opened. I almost did not get out of the car. Then I remembered Mr. Vale's rule. If confronted, stay visible, stay calm, record if lawful, and do not invite him inside. I pressed record on my phone and slipped it into my coat pocket. Richard looked older in the rain, not weak, just more human than I wanted him to be. "Nora," he said. "May we speak?" On the porch. He glanced toward the street, irritated by the exposure. "This is family." "Then family can stand under a porch light." His mouth tightened. "You've become very hard." "No, just informed." He breathed in slowly, as if managing a difficult client. Daniel was not who you thought he was. That hurt because it was partly true. Richard saw the flicker in my face and stepped closer. He lied to you for years. He let you live in that little teacher life while he sat on money he didn't earn. I cleaned up after him. I protected the family name. I protected you. By forging my signature. His eyes changed. Only slightly. Be careful with accusations. Be careful with evidence. The rain ticked against the gutters. Richard lowered his voice. I can still make this easy. You keep the house. You receive $2 million tax-free through a settlement structure. You sign confidentiality. You stop cooperating with outside counsel. Everyone grieves Daniel respectfully and moves on. $2 million. There had been a time in my life when $2 million would have sounded like a fairy tale. Standing on that porch, it sounded like hush money. What happens to Evelyn's scholarship foundation? He looked genuinely annoyed. You don't even know these people. I know students. That money would be wasted. On education. On sentiment, he said. And there it was. The clean edge of him. I thought of Evelyn's letter. Clever men convince themselves kindness is weakness. No, I said. He stared at me. No? No. His politeness drained away, not into shouting, but into something flatter. You will spend years being taken apart by lawyers. Your marriage will become public record. Daniel's cowardice will become public record. Your finances, your infertility, your school complaints, everything. Do you understand what litigation does to private people? I did. That was why the threat landed. But I also understood something else. Silence had already taken enough from me. I looked at him and said, My lawyer will respond to any offer in writing. Richard smiled then, but there was no warmth left in it. You were always more stubborn than Daniel said. I opened the front door. And you were always less subtle than you thought. I went inside and locked it. Then I sent the recording to Mr. Vale. The legal battle did not happen the way movies teach people to expect. There was no dramatic courtroom confession, no attorney waving a single page while everyone gasped. Real justice moved like winter thaw, slow and muddy, revealing what had been buried inch by inch. There were motions, hearings, discovery conferences, protective orders, subpoenas, boxes of documents, spreadsheets so large Elaine joked they needed their own zip code. But every step mattered. The judge assigned to the probate matter was a woman named Marjorie Bell, and she did not suffer theatre. At the first major hearing, Richard sat at the counsel table, in a navy suit, face composed, hands folded. His attorneys described the situation as a family misunderstanding complicated by grief. Judge Bell looked over her glasses. Counsel, forged signatures are not a misunderstanding. That sentence carried me through several bad nights. The deposition was worse than court. I had to sit in a conference room at Mr. Vale's office while Richard's attorney asked me questions for 6 hours. A court reporter typed every word. A camera recorded my face. Richard sat across from me, silent, watching. They asked whether Daniel and I had marital problems. We had a marriage, I said. So yes, we had problems. We also had loyalty, routine, and 26 years of shared life. They asked whether I felt entitled to money I had not earned. I feel entitled to documents bearing my signature being truthful. They asked if grief had affected my memory. Yes, I said. It made some things sharper. Mr. Vale had prepared me not to argue. Answer the question. Pause. Let silence do its work. Then came Richard's deposition. I was not required to attend, but I did. He performed beautifully at first. Calm, professional, saddened by conflict. He said Daniel had been unstable. He said Evelyn's wishes had been unclear. He said the trust changes were made to preserve assets and avoid emotional mismanagement. He used that phrase more than once. Mr. Vale let him build the wall. Then he removed bricks. Mr. Whitaker, did Nora Whitaker appear before notary Patrice Hale on April 18th of the year in question? To my knowledge, yes. Mr. Vale placed a document on the table. This is video from the Cedar Rapids School District Board meeting at 4:15 p.m. that day. Can you identify Mrs. Whitaker on the screen? Richard's attorney objected. Mr. Vale waited. Richard looked at the image. It appears to be her. So she was not at Hawthorne. I can't speak to the exact timing. Mr. Vale placed the notary log beside it. The log says she appeared at Hawthorne at 4:15 p.m. Which record is false? Richard blinked once. I would need to review. That became his refuge. I would need to review. I don't recall. That was handled by staff, Daniel authorized. Standard procedure. Administrative necessity. Then Mr. Vale introduced the email. Use existing ID copy. Wife unavailable. Daniel authorized expediency. Date per instructions. Richard read it without expression. Did you send this email? It appears so. What does wife unavailable mean? I don't recall. Does it mean Nora Whitaker was not present? I don't recall. Then why use an existing ID copy? I would need context. Elaine later told me that fraud cases often turn not on one grand lie, but on the exhaustion of plausible innocence. Richard's explanations did not explode. They eroded. The federal agents entered quietly. Because Hawthorne Trust had moved funds through interstate investment accounts and filed tax documents tied to charitable deductions, federal investigators opened a parallel inquiry. I met with them twice. They were polite, unsentimental, and intensely interested in the foundation that had done almost no charity. One agent, Denise Carver, asked me why I kept such detailed personal calendars. I teach, I said. She smiled faintly. Teachers and fraud investigators are natural allies. You both hate missing homework. For the first time in months, I laughed. The strongest evidence came from Patrice Hale. At first, she defended the documents. Then her own attorney appeared. Then, under oath, she admitted Richard had instructed her to notarize signatures using identification copies kept in Hawthorne's internal file system. She claimed she believed Daniel had authority to authorize the paperwork. Mr. Vale asked, "Did Nora Whitaker physically appear before you?" Patrice looked down. "No." "Did you record that she did?" "Yes." "Why?" She swallowed. Mr. Whitaker said it was a family matter, and that Mrs. Whitaker was aware. "And were you later given a bonus?" Richard's attorney objected. Patrice closed her eyes. "Yes." That was the moment the room changed. Not with noise, with gravity. Richard remained still, but I saw the first true crack in him. His jaw tightened, his gaze moved not to Patrice, not to his attorney, but to me. As if I had done this to him. That is how people like Richard survive inside their own minds. They turn accountability into attack. The probate court froze all disputed assets. Judge Bell removed Richard from any administrative role connected to the trust. She appointed an independent fiduciary. Hawthorne Trust, facing regulatory scrutiny, stopped defending him publicly and began describing his actions as outside-approved procedures. Power protects itself, but it also knows when to cut off a damaged limb. The civil case moved towards settlement after Elaine completed her report. The numbers were staggering, not because of the final balance, but because of the years of quiet extraction. Fees layered upon fees, properties transferred below market value, foundation reimbursements for travel, private events, consulting retainers to firms owned by Richard's college friends. One line in Elaine's report stayed with me. The pattern indicates intentional concealment through complexity. That phrase described more than fraud. It described my marriage's hidden room. It described grief. It described how polite people can build mazes and call them systems. The settlement conference happened in a federal courthouse conference room with beige walls and bad coffee. Richard was thinner by then, still immaculate, but diminished. His attorneys no longer spoke of misunderstandings. They spoke of resolution. I sat beside Mr. Vale, with Elaine behind us and a binder in front of me. On the first page was Evelyn's letter about the Scholarship Foundation. I had brought it not because it was legally necessary, but because I needed to remember what the money had been meant to do. Richard's side offered a number. Mr. Vale rejected it. They offered another. He rejected that too. Hours passed. At one point, the mediator, a retired judge, asked me privately what I wanted. I looked out the window at the grey city below. "I want the account restored," I said. "I want the house protected. I want the Scholarship Foundation created as Evelyn intended. I want my name cleared, and I want Richard unable to touch any of it." The mediator waited. "That's all?" "No," I said. "I want him to admit the signatures were false." The mediator sighed. "Admissions can be difficult. So can silence." By evening the framework was done. Richard would resign from Hawthorne and from all trust-related entities. He would repay millions through asset liquidation and insurance recovery. Hawthorne would contribute to restitution to avoid further civil exposure. The trust would be reformed under court supervision. My beneficiary status would be restored. Evelyn's Scholarship Foundation would be funded and independently governed. The farmhouse on County Road 9 would transfer to the trust, then to me personally, after title defects were cleared. Richard did not give the admission in open court. Men like him rarely hand you the clean satisfaction you deserve, but in the settlement record, under carefully negotiated language, he acknowledged that documents had been executed without my personal appearance and that representations made about my consent were inaccurate. Inaccurate. A small word trying to carry a large sin. But it was enough for the judge. The criminal matter continued after the civil resolution. Patrice cooperated. Hawthorne paid penalties. Richard eventually pled guilty to financial crimes connected to falsified trust records and misappropriation. He did not go to prison for as long as some people thought he should. White-collar consequences often arrive wearing soft shoes. But he lost the thing he loved most. His name no longer opened doors. By late autumn, the account was protected. After taxes, restitution, legal fees, foundation funding, and court supervision, I was still left with more money than I could emotionally understand. Mr. Vale told me I did not have to make major decisions quickly. "Money after trauma can become another emergency," he said. "Don't let it." So I did not buy a mansion. I did not buy a sports car. I did not become a woman strangers would point to in restaurants. I kept teaching for one more year because my seniors were halfway through their story, and I had promised them we would get to the civil rights unit properly. I did hire someone to fix the gutters. I replaced the kitchen floor. I paid off the mortgage quietly and slept better the night after the paperwork cleared. Then I moved. Not far, just far enough. I sold the house on Ashbury Lane to a young couple with a baby and a golden retriever. Before I left, I stood in the empty kitchen and listened to the creak near the pantry one last time. I thought I would feel only betrayal there, but grief is rarely obedient. I remembered Daniel making coffee, Daniel laughing at my terrible singing, Daniel hiding papers in the basement because he was scared and ashamed and too late. I forgave him slowly, not all at once. Not because what he did was harmless, it was not, but because love, like history, can contain more than one truth. Daniel betrayed me by keeping the secret. He also tried, clumsily and too late, to leave me the key. Both things were true. I moved into Evelyn's farmhouse after restoring it. The work took months. We repaired the porch, replaced the roof, cleaned the old wood floors, and opened the rooms to light. I kept the lilacs. I planted tomatoes, lavender, and a row of sunflowers along the fence because one of my students told me sunflowers always look like they are paying attention. In the smallest bedroom, I made a study. Daniel's note is kept there in an archival sleeve. Evelyn's letter too, not as shrines, but as evidence. The Scholarship Foundation launched the following spring. We named it the Evelyn Whitaker Rural Scholars Fund. The first awards went to 6 students from small towns across Iowa. One wanted to study nursing, one wanted agricultural engineering, one wanted to become a history teacher, which made me turn away during the ceremony so no one would see my face. I told them the scholarship came from a woman who believed hidden resources should become visible opportunities. That was all. I traveled eventually, not luxuriously, quietly. I took a train through the Rockies. I spent a week in Maine walking near Greywater and eating blueberry pie. I visited the National Archives in Washington, D.C., because old habits remain, and I still believe records are sacred things. Peace did not arrive like a movie ending. It came in ordinary pieces. Coffee on the porch, rain on the farmhouse roof. A student's email saying, "I registered to vote because of your class." A legal pad with plans for the garden instead of evidence timelines. Some nights, I still wake and remember Richard's voice on my porch. I remember Daniel's unfinished sentence. I remember the bank statement folded inside the funeral bulletin, but those memories no longer own the room. People ask whether the money changed my life. Of course it did, but not in the way they imagine. Money gave me safety. It gave me choices. It gave me the ability to protect Evelyn's wishes and my own future. But it did not give me back the years of trust that had been altered without my consent. It did not erase the feeling of discovering that men had sat in rooms and discussed my life as if I were an obstacle on a form. What healed me was not the money. It was the truth. It was learning that patience is not weakness, documentation is not obsession, calm is not surrender. A woman does not have to shout to be dangerous to a lie. Sometimes she only has to keep copies. I spent my career teaching young people that history belongs to those who preserve evidence. I never imagined that lesson would save me. If there is anything I want you to take from my story, it is this. When something feels wrong, do not let politeness talk you out of noticing. When someone powerful tells you it is too complicated for you to understand, start taking notes. When grief makes the world blurry, wait before signing anything. And when people call your questions disrespectful, remember that truth has never needed permission from comfort. I did not just become wealthy. I became free. I did not just defeat a man who stole from me. I recovered the woman I had been before fear taught me to doubt my own eyes. And in the end, I learned that inheritance is not always money. Sometimes, it is courage passed from one woman to another through a hidden letter, a locked box, and the simple instruction to tell the truth. So tell me, what would you have done if a lawyer approached you at your husband's funeral and told you there was $38 million in your name that everyone had kept hidden? Would you have confronted the family immediately, or would you have stayed quiet and gathered evidence first? Share your thoughts in the comments, and if this story stayed with you, please like, subscribe, and pass it along to someone who needs to remember that calm women can still change everything.